Hall of the West was a draw for many young people around the turn of the century. Trains enabled travel, new inventions made life easier, and a Western adventure beckoned. So it was unsurprising that 24-year-old Rockwood Brown and his close college friend, Olaf King Grimstad, would join the homesteading crowd, moving to a new experience in the western United States. Both young men were recent law school graduates, and both rightly decided there would be a need for attorneys as the population grew. They temporarily bid farewell to their college sweethearts, but with a promise to retrieve them in marriage as soon as the young men were established. In 1911, Brown and Grimstad left their homes, one in Vermont and one in Minnesota, to travel via a newly constructed train route. A population boom encouraged by the government's promise of free agricultural land, huge profits from bumper crops, and Alaskan gold fever drew thousands of people to the Northwest. Both men yearned to be a part of the excitement. Here was a grand opportunity for a fresh start in life, even though they had yet to decide where they may eventually choose to set down roots. After traversing 2,000 miles from east to west, the town that caught their attention was Billings, Montana. They may have gauged enormous community potential when they walked through its bustling streets, or perhaps they were just running low on cash, which was true. But they both decided that Billings, the sixth fastest-growing region in the country, would provide a strong catalyst for building their new business and personal lives. They soon scored it big with high-profile law cases. In 1922, the partners even bought farmland about 50 miles northeast of Billings near the town of Custer, Montana. Their rural land, initially amounting to 210 acres and quickly expanding to 4 times that size, was acquired from Grimstad's brother. Becoming instant farm owners, the two lawyers named their stake the Grimrock Ranch. Efforts were immediately undertaken to transform the ranch into a thriving sugar beet farm. But why sugar beets? Well, this crop was already profitably grown in the region, and this nutritional duplicate of sugarcane would likely guarantee the farming success of these young men. Oh, and just by the way, declared Rockwood Brown, I'd also like to try raising a few sheep. Brown had watched the wool industry flourish, building a fortune for another Montana citizen named Charles M. Bear, a future target of Brown's proceedings in court. But for the moment, perhaps sheep could also be the basis for his similar financial profit. And there were other positives. The Yellowstone River was an abundant water source, which offered steamboat shipments into Billings. Rich grasslands aided the raising of sheep. Good weather promoted flourishing agriculture. A railway bordered the new farm property. And Brown and Grimstad had the perfect combination of business experience, legal background, and drive to make it work. In only 2 years, Fox Movietone News would highlight the Grimrock Ranch as the world's largest sugar beet plantation by producing a newsreel that was ultimately watched by millions in the U.S. That 1924 film showed the implements, machinery, animals, and people that enabled this ranch operation to succeed. Sugar beets would be loaded into trains and transported to the Billings factory. Here, The beets would be unloaded with special beet forks and then floated into the plant for further processing. The leafy byproducts were reused at the ranch as sheep and cattle feed. Everything seemed destined to work. Yet many challenges would affect the Grimrock Ranch and its future. And it has worked for more than 100 years. Richard Brown, grandson of the ranch founder, drove a small cadre of family members out to the ranch to conduct a tour that could then be seen by other descendants of Rockwood Brown. This is Custer, Montana today, the town that closely borders what was first called the Grimrock Ranch. In 1974, the ranch's name was changed.
Welcome to Junction City Ranch. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Junction City Ranch Company. This is the area of the ranch. The green boundary here shows the land that was initially the Grimrock Ranch. The area in red here on the right was the old Cooley place. Grandpa bought and added on to the ranch. So Rocky, where was Junction City physically located?
Right across the river. It was not only a little town, but it was a docking station on the river. And so there was traffic on the river which would stop at Junction City. Among other points of recognition, Junction City at one time had 7 saloons. Can you imagine that little dinky town having 7 saloons?
I seem to recall hearing that Junction City was alive and well when the Custer battle occurred. There were stern paddle wheelers going up and down the river as far as Billings, and they were stopping here at Junction City. But it wasn't long after that the railroad came through, and Junction City one winter, when the river was frozen over very solidly, they put the whole town on sleds and pulled it across the river to the south bank because they were concerned about Indian raids. And it wasn't long after that Junction City ceased to exist and the town of Custer began.
On the land that we own across the river up on the bluff, I'll show you a teepee ring. And it's a round circular group of rocks. And what the Indians did is that they would put a tent pole, probably a tree in the middle, and then they would sew hides together, and at the bottom of that teepee they'd put big boulders, and there is evidence there of the Indians having been up there on the bluff that you can see from here.
One of the other things we'll stop and see on top of that bluff is the old Junction City Cemetery. We're standing here at the Junction City Cemetery, or the location of it. Junction City was located right down there in those cottonwoods on the north side of the Yellowstone River. And as any place that has any number of people has to have, it had a cemetery. It's up here on top of the hill. This was restored about 15 years ago by the family of some of the folks that were buried here. Family name is Ship, and so we've got ships that go back to 1875 to 1908 buried here, and all the way up to 1933. But there were many other people that were buried up here during the course of the time Junction City was an active city.
Now, where would the other graves be?
Well, you got one right there behind.
Oh,
Joseph.
right here. Yeah. And maybe one right here.
You'll find a little depression, so you can tell kind of where things were. but who was buried there, nobody knew who they were. Yeah. Shortly after the city was moved to the south bank of the Yellowstone, it went out of business because the railroad had come through and the town of Custer became established. It was a central point for farmers to bring their wares into. They had to have a place for a watering station for the locomotives, especially, and to take on additional fuel. That's why the town of Custer got started, and it's still a thriving community today.
All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our cow business. We've got 280 max, but every year we experience this, that some of the cows, because of age or infirmity, do poorly, and so they need to be replaced. And what we do, our calves start coming in January, and then in the fall, when they put on a little weight, we pick out, whatever replacements we need, 50 or 60 heifers, carry those into the spring and breed them with a bull which is compatible with the heifers. It doesn't throw a big heavy calf.
Mainly, we have our own bulls, but we've done some AI.
Across the river, the Allen Creek Road will take you into the upper regions of the ranch. This is where free-run cattle graze in the spring and summer.
When I was young, I remember us talking about that being Chief Rock. Because
What'd you say? What one?
Chief,
Yeah.
as in Indian chief. Because from one angle it looked like it was an Indian
Well,
chief.
it looks like there's a face when you look at it from right here.
It does.
There are fascinating rock formations and caves on the Junction City Ranch property, which undoubtedly hosted prehistoric humans of bygone eras. Even today, it hosts prehistoric humans from local high schools who leave their artifacts to be discovered by future generations.
The timing of the acquisition of all of this, it began in the 30s or 40s. We've continued it. When parcels come up, we buy them. But what we've got now is what we're going to be left with. Central America?
Go right up there.
We could
That
go,
sign's still there.
That sign's still there. We could go right up past that sign that's straight ahead and up on top of the hill, and up on top of the hill to the left to that overlook.
Yeah.
And it is truly spectacular.
Yeah, that one's
The view from the ranch's higher plateaus is indeed stunning. Green panoramas of spring turn into golden vistas when the hot summer arrives, but the beauty remains. So much so that a few years ago, Rocky Brown chose this area to plant a hidden time capsule for one of the Bixby family relatives.
Hi, boys. I don't know when you're going to see this, but
Boys?
yeah, well, they can be boys no matter how old they are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I guess they can.
Yeah. And whoever else is with you. It'll be so fun. So I hope you brought a couple of beers or something to have while you're digging through it. We're here with your grandpa's Uncle Rocky, and he is 88 years old, and Holly, who is, probably 25.
While I have a chance, I want to say there's so much crazy stuff going in this without reason. Someday I'll sit down, we'll spend an evening, and I'll have a scotch in my hand, I'll tell you all about it.
Okay. Hi, Holly.
Hi,
Where-
and I put that in my note that I hope one day I'll get to meet you guys.
Be flashing.
Hey, you have to be gentle. Come on.
It's a lot like burying a body. Why did you guys have to do her in? I don't understand. No, you don't say that. Good heavens.
Water for the cattle in the upper areas of the ranch has been a constant issue.
We've got 14 and a half square miles up here, 8 pastures. Every pasture has its own water source and its own tankage to hold water.
Reservoirs have been built to collect water, and existing wells have used the more primitive technology of past years. However, newer technology has updated water delivery, as Richard Brown describes.
Each pasture, there's a water source. So the cows don't have to walk too terribly far to get to water, and they'll make use of all the grass within that particular pasture. And as you can see, it uses a ancient technology called a windmill. Now we use a system of solar panels to collect solar energy. So the transition from the old to the new is visible right here. With the new system, it requires sunshine, but we get enough days of sunshine, it's not a problem.
But the trick of it is to space out your water sources so that they don't overeat the grass.
They'll range out as much as a mile away from the water source, but you get much over that, and they start saying, I'm not going to go that far.
Junction City Ranch used to be a sheep ranch, but it's not anymore. So why did it change?
Well, that goes back to personal preferences. Grandpa Brown was in the sheep business. He loved sheep. I didn't like them, but I never did. When I worked at the stockyards, I grew not to like sheep. I can remember when I was a kid and we had sheep, and a ewe would lose its lamb. So you'd go to another ewe who had twins, and you would put the pelt of the deceased one on the twin, and the mother would adopt it.
Because of the smell?
Yes, she'd think it was her own calf.
Thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about the geology of the ranch, because it is interesting, especially with regard to some of the fossils that are found here. The farm part of the ranch is alluvial deposits that result from the Yellowstone River, the historic Yellowstone River. And we've got a mixture of silts and clays and sands down there, and even some gravels in spots, because where the ranch, or where the farm is right now, the river once was. Even more interesting, we can look around up here and we can see river cobbles on top of some of these hills. And a lot of people say, well, how can that be? Did somebody move those up here? They got here because this is where the historical in geologic terms, Yellowstone River was millions and millions of years ago. And it finally cut down into the terrain in the Yellowstone River Valley where it is now. So right now we're standing on top of a whole bunch of sandstone layers that collectively are known as the Mesa Verde Formation, or the Eagle Sandstone. The reason why that's of particular interest is because the time frame when these sandstones were laid down is the time frame when a lot of dinosaurs were roaming around in this part of North America. This is about 70 million years ago, 75 perhaps. It's before the Rocky Mountains started to get thrust up. There was an inland sea that ran from the Yukon in Canada to where Houston is on the Gulf Coast, at least now. So it was a perfect environment for a lot of critters to live. And so that's why we find things like the hadrosaur, which was down by the river. An interesting thing happened here on the ranch in the late 1960s. A neighbor of ours was walking on land that we leased from the BLM, and he found a piece of fossilized bone sticking out of the riverbank. And he dug a little bit and found out there was more bone there, and so came to us and told us about it. We contacted Montana State University in Bozeman and told them about it, and they sent a team down here to see what was there. The result was they found the most complete hadrosaur skeleton, or duck-billed dinosaur skeleton, that had ever been found. So they commenced to excavate it. It sat in the lab, in their archives, for at least 30 years before it began to be worked on. During that time, the concrete became acidic, and as a result, the only thing that survived of that skeleton was the head, which is now on display at the Museum of the Rockies. This was beachfront property at that point. So the fact that we have sandstone here says this was a very shallow environment. And you think of how extensive these are, it ran for long distances.
But now that was along an inland sea, was it not?
Yes, that was along this inland sea that for a long time covered the area from about the western side of Wyoming and up into Montana to midway into the Dakotas. So it could have been 500 miles wide or so, and very shallow. That's why we have these rim rocks north of the ranch that we have as our rangeland, and why they are so stair-stepped right now, because of all the layers of sandstone that were deposited over several million years, 70 to 75 million years ago.
Moving from millions of years ago to mid-June of 2022, an unprecedented flood overwhelmed Montana and seriously affected eastern river towns, streets, and bridges. The Yellowstone River was incredibly unforgiving. Some roads actually vanished or were ravaged under churning waters. Yellowstone Park was closed. Damage was extensive. Flooding also affected the Junction City Ranch.
That flood covered a great deal of the farm itself. In recorded history, it's the highest it's been. First, I just want to mention what the river did this year during the flood that happened about 4 weeks ago now, 4 weekends ago. It was a historic flood, something that has not been seen in recorded history since the white man's been in this area, and probably not all the Indians have been in this area. This area out in front of us that the river now occupies 3 years ago was land. We lost that in the last 3 years, and most of it this year. If you look out here to that wet gravel patch and you draw a line from there to the point where the land ends out in the distance, everything between us and that line was our land 3 years ago. This erosion down here where those Jersey barriers are put, that land used to extend out to where the end of the gravel bar was. Last year it was out to the end of the gravel bar. Our land went out beyond where that big snag is out in the river.
Oh gosh.
So who manages the ranch today?
The farm was always operated on a sharecropping basis because both Grandpa and Grimstad lived in Billings. They had other things that they were doing, and they didn't have the time to be down here all the time administering what was going on, much less work in the fields themselves. That sharecropping paradigm has continued successfully ever since then, and in fact, that's exactly what we do now with the Hine family.
We try to get up, and get our kids to school. And then I go back and feed the livestock. My family, I'm fourth generation beet farmer, and we've lived within this Billings area all of our lives. So that's where my family kind of came and settled in. And my dad grows sugar beets, my grandfather did, and his grandfather did. And like my kids now, if they were to take off and expose the interest to it, then I guess they would be fifth generation for it.
Well, right now on the irrigated part, we raise alfalfa, hay for the cows, and we have some grass that we do hay for the cows also. And then we have sugar beets that's contracted with Western Sugar Co-op. It's all the farmers own it. And then we raise Coors malt barley this year, and then the rest is just irrigated or dryland pasture for the cows. All the irrigation on this ranch comes off of the Yellowstone River. Down on the cow side, there's about 280 head of cows down here, mother cows, and then there'd be 14 head of bulls. And we run about 160 head of cows with the bulls in the hills, and then about another 120 along the river here on the irrigated and in the brush.
The number one crop at the Junction City Ranch for 100 years has remained the sugar beet.
These just look like little blue BBs, but there's a coating on that that makes them plant easier. And when we plant, we're trying to space them 4.5 inches apart. Years ago, when beets became started, they would pop them out of the ground with a horse. And like you said, they would have hen crews come by, and they'd pick them up and they'd chop them off with what they call a beet knife. And it was a long knife with a blade, and on the end it had a hook so they could stab them beets without bending over all the way to the ground. Pick them up and top them. And now everything we have done is with a machine. It goes by and it knocks the foliage off the top, and then we have another one that comes back and it picks them out of the ground and bounces them around and gets the mud off them and loads them into a truck.
We plant about 55,000 seeds per acre is what we're planting roughly. And that stuff is somewhere around $220 an acre to plant. So it's a fairly expensive crop to go plant. The early harvest normally starts the first week of September, and you're allowed to produce upwards of 7 to 8 ton per planted acre in that early harvest group to be delivered early. And then once that's over with in September, then the regular harvest starts October 6th, and then at October 6th they pile everything for storage as they process throughout the winter. The September harvested beets pretty much have a shelf life of about 7 to 10 days, and they have to be processed. It's too hot to store them for any longer than that. They'll just rot and deteriorate in a pile. When the trucks get loaded, they go up the road here to a pile ground. There's a machine, you dump them in, they try to clean them one more time, and then they put them in giant piles. They try not to pile those beets over, I believe it's 20 feet tall, so that they can still respirate, and if they have to cool, and as they cool down, they can still breathe efficiently.
And they're held there until they're ready to be hauled to the factory and processed and turned into sugar.
Other agricultural crops grown on ranch lands are as important as sugar beets. Livestock survival in winter depends on the summer harvest of grass hay and alfalfa. Low temperatures in January may drop to an average of 4 degrees Fahrenheit, while 10 inches of snow may be expected throughout the month. And the survival of Sunday afternoon sports watching may depend on the ranch's summer harvest of barley in the correct proportions needed by the Coors Brewing Company.
The barley is all dictated by Coors. They have certain varieties. When they have that variety, then they know how it's going to malt in their malting houses, how it's going to produce, the beer that they're trying to get. So as far as when it goes through its fermentation, all that stuff, they know how the yeast is going to react when they try to make beer out of it. And then the alfalfa is just kind of whatever the new variety is that's going to stand up to our winters. If you want to graze it, there's some that are a little tougher for that, but a lot of it's all bought locally by local seed salesmen that we have around here.
Levi's wife, Anna, is the mother of 2 farm kids, and she's a registered nurse in the town of Hardin, Montana.
I was a city kid. My dad did work for that Southern Agriculture Research Center. He was a farm foreman. So I had a little bit of that experience of, you know, the crops and the irrigating, but I was definitely a town kid, so it was completely new coming out here. Raising kids on a place like this, it's a completely different experience than being raised in town. And by that I mean just the more experiences. I mean, Ty's at 7 years old is driving tractor and is irrigating, and when I was 7 years old living in town, I was barely riding my bike. So I think it's just being able to provide those experiences and those memories for the kids that town kids don't get. You know, they don't get to drive tractors, they don't get to drive four-wheelers, they don't get to have dirt bikes.
Here is Henry, as the kids call him, is a pet. He's a pain in the butt, actually. You know, when you want the cows to go one way, he thinks you got something in your pocket for him, and here he comes to see if he can get something out of your pocket. But
do you raise any sheep?
No.
Why not?
Because they're too much work and they're a pain in the butt.
Branding is the number one thing, probably, just in the sense of the cooking of the food and getting things prepared and just trying to keep things organized during branding. But otherwise, besides that, Levi and Justin and his dad, Perry, they kind of just do it all.
so the branding part is kind of unique. We still do it the older way, I guess you may call it. We don't have the calf table and all that. We still have a lot of people that enjoy coming out. They grew up on ranches, no longer live on the ranch, but they still have a horse. You know, they've got a lot of ranch experience, and they come out and we still rope them, drag them, and we brand them. And normally it ends up between 50 and 60 people that we have come out and help us there. That normally happens around the 3rd weekend in April.
It's a social event. This year we branded about 280 calves. For a long time we used a brand which was a reverse RB.
We called it the blotch brand. When brand, you get an enclosed letter, and the inside it blotches and the skin all comes off and stuff. It's not a clean brand. But the YF is open. You can see a Y and F, no enclosures.
The YF, Y and F. What's the stand for?
Just an open brand.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, just an open brand.
Yeah.
If the RB had been open, we'd still be using it.
Yeah, sure.
The one thing I want people to know is that we take a lot of pride in what we do. We want to take care of our animals, we want to take care of the land, we want to do whatever we can, and there's always new things coming along the line. You know, vaccinations for cattle, fungicides for crops, things like that, to help us produce a more efficient crop. You know, the one thing that the industry wants us to be is sustainable. Well, if we went back to doing it the way they did 50 years ago, it'd be very hard to be sustainable and produce a quality product. By the time you feed that animal, you breed them animals and all that, you might only make $150, $200 a head. So you don't have a lot of room. You know, we do this to keep our food supply in good supply. We're doing this to maintain our sustainability. We want people to know we have a lot of pride in what we're doing. You know, we aren't just people planting the seed.